Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces, and as always, it's nice to see those of you who don't know yet, and hopefully this will be the first time that I see you of many. I am really excited about this topic, and so subsequently I teach about it quite frequently. Every time I do, I try to upgrade the examples that I'm giving, the Dharma that I'm quoting, and the practices that I'm going to guide you through. So because of that, I'm a little bit spontaneous sometimes. And so I had some ideas for us today or tonight, whatever time it is for you, that we'll experiment with. And fortunately, because it's a group of this size, we can also communicate with each other, I hope, fairly well. It's not hundreds of people, which is always nice as well. But having a group of this size, I think we can hopefully get a little bit more personal. And you can ask questions that are coming up for you. So the way that we'll run this, or that I'll guide this 2 hours, is that we'll do a little bit of a checking in practice to begin. I'm going to give just a little bit of a framework and outline about this subject matter. And then we'll do a little longer practice, 20 minutes or so. And then I'm going to intersperse some talking with some shorter practices. Now, when I say shorter, I know it's all relative. So what I'm saying is maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a couple of times during our 2 hours, and we will take a break as well. Because I think it's interesting and I hope important to hear context, framework, guidelines, just to understand why we might be doing something that we're doing, and then to experience it for ourselves, and we can weigh it out that way. So let's see how it goes. Let's begin with a practice of what I call checking in. So I'm not sure if you're sitting or standing or lying down. I can't see all of you. So let's just put ourselves in a position, a posture, a shape, a form that is supportive of our going inward, of turning inwardly. So we want to be comfortable and yet awake. And just with care and kindness, notice the way that you're posturing or positioning your body. And if you need to rearrange a little bit, that's fine right now. And you're welcome to have your eyes opened. You're welcome to close your eyes, whatever is best for you in this moment. If your eyes are opened, I suggest that you cast your gaze downward. Just slightly. And let's begin by noticing the air around us, the air in the room or the area of your environment that you're in. And see if you can sense maybe the softness of the air, maybe the temperature of the air. Maybe there's movement in the air, like a wind or a breeze. See what you can feel. You might notice that there's a difference between the air that's on your skin that's exposed and the air where the skin is underneath your clothing. It might be a little warmer or cooler. And then see if you can notice the air from your environment, just very, very gently entering and leaving right at the entrance of your nostrils. Now we are getting into more awareness of the exchange of breath, breathing in from the outer environment and breathing out to the outer environment or into. Just as the air brushes into the nostrils and brushes out. And then if you'd like to, bring your breath a little bit more deeply inside. Very gently direct your breath inside, down the throat, into the lungs, as deeply as you'd like. And then back out. Just a very gentle, directive breath. Noticing the air as it brushes the nostrils and enters, and then noticing the sensations of the breath, air, breath, as it enters in and down the throat, maybe into the lungs, and then back outward. Now that we've entered in, at least initially, to our inner landscape via the vehicle of breath or air, you can even think of it as wind or breeze. Check in and see how your body is in general. What can you sense internally, just overall? If there was a tone or a color or flavor that might describe how your body feels right now. And then draw your kind awareness to your emotional body. And just check in and ask, how is your heart doing? How is your emotional body right now? Again, as an overall tone, could think of it as a flavor, a color, a landscape even. And next, let's check into our mental body. We don't necessarily always find that in the skull. But the mind of the body, where is it? What is the landscape, the tone, the flavor, the color of your mental environment right now. And then allow yourself to take a few more deep and sweeping breaths. See if you can breathe from the top down or the bottom up, as if you were able to breathe into the entire length of your body, from head to toe or feet to head, whichever direction you prefer or organically arises. And then after your next exhale is complete, just very, very gently allow your eyes to lift or open. And take in the computer screen as part of your kind awareness. So we're including the screen and each other as part of our practice, not separate from. And I like to remind everyone, I remind myself that within each of these rectangles, there's a very full and rich life. So although we appear rather flat to each other here, we're not. And so I think it's helpful to honor that as we look out at each other in this format. So the checking in practice is to give us a sense of how we are now before we do anything that is going to rearrange how we are. Because part of the benefit of any practice, I believe, is atoning, a rearranging, releasing, a concentration, letting go, all of the attributes, understanding, reflection, introspection, all the attributes of practice are working from a particular place of where we start, let's say, and then we do the practice, and then we may or may not notice how it's changed us. So if we start by noticing where we are as we begin tonight or today together, then along the way, we're going to check in and notice. I'm going to ask you to notice, how do you feel now? What's your body like? The physical body, the subtle body, the energetic body, all those three I think are the same. The emotional body, the mental body. So all of our bodies can be separated in terms of language or even in terms of how we might sense them. You know, we might sense things differently, but it's awareness. You know, we're aware of our awareness in its different forms. And I find that the different forms fascinating. And the Buddha talked about mind, body quite often, as you probably know, and talked about the body as being incredibly important, mindfulness of the body as being incredibly important to waking up, to developing wisdom, to developing compassion, to just knowing, just general knowing. And he spoke about mind and body using two words, nama and rupa. And nama means mind, and it means mentality, And rupa means body, and it also means materiality. So I suggest that you consider the body as the material form of consciousness. Just try it on. Because oftentimes we don't give the body as much credit as is due. The body is full of wisdom. And the body is speaking to us all the time, but we generally don't hear it. So our bodies have a language called sensations. That's what we call them. And it's not a language of words. Of course, we can place words on top of any sensation or any feeling or any thought, and we do, as we all know. But it's not necessary. And so part of what we'll be discovering or traversing together today is, how can we be aware of consciousness without necessarily giving it a word, but just sensing it? Like, what really is the felt sense anyway? So you may notice that there's a tug towards the mind and concept and cognition, and there's nothing wrong with that. We want to absolutely know, cognitively know things. But we're going to seek a balance, hopefully, in the next couple of hours, so that we get to know the landscape of the body, the emotional landscape, the mental landscape, along with the physical landscape, that we can name, if we're going to name it, and we do have to name things to communicate, but we can call it the subtle body or the somatic body. So we're what I call somatically sensing. We're going to somatically sense the expression or expressions of the heart mind. Rather than think about them, we're going to somatically sense these expressions. So our bodies are always sensing, as I mentioned, and we go out into the world like these feelers in a way. Now, some of us have, maybe dulled a little of that out for many good reasons. Some of us are way sensitive and we're feeling and sensing everything. So we obviously have our extremes. We also have that middle ground of the body always sensing thoughts and emotions as we move about our waking hours. And so the body is always reflecting or even signaling or expressing thoughts and emotions. But generally, we don't notice that because we're too busy doing whatever it is that we're doing, or busy enough, let's say. And so we go along our lives, mainly, most of us, with a body that gets us around until it doesn't anymore. Until we injure it, or it gets ill, or it gets older, and then we have to pay more attention to it. But we can also pay attention to it now, as it is now, whether you're, whatever age you are and however your health is, we can utilize the body as part of our path of wisdom and compassion, part of our path of waking up, of releasing suffering for ourselves and for others. So the body is signaling, and we don't necessarily feel it. So we're going to move into that sensorial landscape a little bit today. And the same goes for the breath. So our breath is always reflecting what's going on in the mind and the heart as well. But again, generally, we don't really notice it. It's quite subtle and nuanced. Now, if you do a retreat, you might notice that more. In fact, that's one of the beauties of retreat, is that we notice everything a little bit more. Our awareness becomes more heightened. The mind quiets down, the thinking mind quiets down, and awareness opens up and out. So there's a lot of benefit in retreat. But we can also begin to notice the body as the body is doing whatever it is doing at that time, rather than later. so that the signals that the body is giving us at all times are generally fairly quiet. So we can attune ourselves to what those signals are and hear them sooner and sooner. For instance, let's say that you're listening to someone and they're saying some things that aren't very nice to you or to anyone. And you might notice that your stomach or your belly starts to get a little tight. And maybe you don't notice that at first, but maybe you notice that afterwards because, oh, geez, my stomach now is really, really tight. I've got now a stomach ache. And then maybe you do that a lot. And years later, you walk around with a tense belly. You know, your belly's always kind of tight in case something comes up that you don't like. More of a, reactionary stance. Or, this doesn't always happen, or you have stomach issues or gut issues because your stomach's always held tightly. Things like that. Or we hold our shoulders up if we're feeling a little nervous or a little bit on the spot sometimes. And if we hold our shoulders up enough, long enough, or enough times, guess what? The muscles shorten and the shoulders stay up a little bit more. So there's tension in the shoulders. Now, not that much. I'm doing that to an extreme, but I think you know what I mean. And so our bodies are, interestingly enough, shaped over time. Or I should say, probably more correctly, reshaped over time. So our body is obviously affected by genetics, by our family or familial environment. We watch our caregivers or parents, what have you, whomever is around us the most that we think is in charge. We watch their body language. That's as children, we learn that way. And we learn from our culture. And I think we're all very aware of all of these things. But our culture shapes our bodies to a very large degree. And sometimes we don't notice that so much. There are cultural norms. There's what a culture, any given culture thinks is beautiful or not beautiful, good or bad, etc. And that can come with body shape. That obviously comes with the color of our skin, our hair, etc. So there's a lot of opinions and perceptions around bodies that we develop, that we're given at birth a lot of times, but then we also develop unknowingly as children. And then they become conditions that we maybe don't even know about until we start to practice meditation or psychology or a little bit of both. So what I'd like to start with, I'm going to talk us through a practice or guide us into a practice. And I am going to do a fair amount of guidance because I want to bring you into maybe some places that you haven't gone into exactly this way before. It was a little bit of an awkward way of saying something, but I think you know what I mean. I hope you do. So this next practice will be involving breath, but it's also involving a little bit of imagination. And don't worry if you're not an artist. Everybody's got imagination. Everybody has imagination. If we don't have imagination, we can't imagine what we want to have for dinner. We can't imagine what kind of job might be better than what we have now, what kind of person we might want to meet, however misguided that might be, as I just say that. But, we imagine things as we would hope them to be all the time. Whether they turn out that way is another story. But everybody's got imagination. So this breath practice is going to be very much involved with what you're sensing, but also what you might be imagining as well. And I'd like you to follow whatever it is that you sense or imagine, because that is going to be your intuitive guide to what we're going to call the subtle body or the somatic body. Okay. So I recommend that you do this with your eyes closed. It's just a little easier to picture or imagine or go in this way, but it's completely up to you. If you do keep your eyes open, just cast your gaze down so that your eyes are soft and that your eyelids are relaxed. And again, choose a shape or a posture or form to place your body in that's as comfortable as possible for now, that supports you turning inwardly and not having to struggle with physical sensations as much as possible. And allow yourself this time to begin by sensing weight, sensing the weight of your body, wherever it is that you feel it the most right now. You can also sense weight in terms of just being very aware of gravity, the pull of gravity on our physical bodies. And may gravity and weight connect you a little bit more to whatever it is that you're sitting on or lying on or standing on. To see if you can sense contact with the inanimate objects or object that your body is resting on right now. And from contact, see if you can sense connection to the ground, connection to the earth, maybe even a deeper connection to yourself. We'll do a very light body scan by going to the feet first and just noticing whatever the feet are touching. The contact of the feet with something. And then notice your legs and how each feels. Maybe they're contacting something like a chair, or you're lying down on something, or maybe your legs are contacting fabric of your pants or your skirt, clothing, or air. Just get a sense of your legs, what they might be touching, what's surrounding them. And then let's move very gently into our pelvic area, into the pelvic bowl, and see if you can sense the weight of the pelvic bowl, the hips, Maybe you even get a sense of the contents of the bowl, the belly. What can you feel if you can in that area? And then let's draw our attention upward a little bit into right below the rib cage, right above the hips, and see if there are any sensations in there that you can feel. Or even access. And then move up a little into the ribs. Maybe you sense the rib cage itself, or the skin around the ribs, or even the contents of the organs and glands inside. Heart, lungs, whatever is comfortable for you and accessible for you. And then notice your upper body, the collarbones, the shoulders, front and back, inside. Just scanning around and see what you can feel. And then move your kind awareness into your arms, the upper arms, and then the lower arms, and your hands, palm of the hand, top of the hand, and fingertips. And then let's sweep back up and notice the neck and the throat. The jaw, the skin on the face, the eyes, and our skull. Now imagine that you can sweep your breath just like a breeze, just like a wind, from the top of your head to the soles of your feet, or from the soles of your feet to the top of your head. You can elongate your breath if that facilitates that for you. You can keep the breath as it is. And see if you can imagine or even sense the breath moving up and down the full length of your body. Maybe you go in sections, maybe it's just a grand sweep. See what might work for you. And also know that sometimes we can't go the whole length of the body imagistically or with the breath. And that's okay. And also quite interesting to note. Not uncommon, but let's use it as curious for now. And as you're attempting or drawing your breath from the top to the bottom, from the bottom to the top, maybe a shape comes to mind, a shape of your body. Maybe it's like a cylinder. Maybe it's like a thread. Maybe it's like a triangle. Maybe it's more circular. Maybe it's got curves. See if something like that might come to you intuitively as you breathe up and down and up. This breath is rarely straight up and down. It generally has a little twist or turn here or there. So we're sensing our way through the body, walking through the landscape to begin, and breathing throughout now, maybe even imagining or sensing a shape. And finally, imagine that your body, because it is really your house. It's your house that hopefully is a home. Maybe it'll become your home. In other words, you'll live in it more fully and feel really at ease. But if we imagine that our body is like our house, is there an area of your body where you sense the most space? Or maybe the most light? Or maybe the most fresh air, circulation? Metaphorically, can you sense that? Is there an area of your body, your house, that you don't really want to go into? It could be like an attic, basement, an area that you can't really picture, that you don't feel that well or all that much. And that if you even tried, you couldn't really breathe into that area of your body. So it's just a zone that you don't go to very often, if at all. Can you find a place like that? Is there a part or an area or a room of your body where you've stashed away all your childhood toys? Maybe you get a sense of what that area of your body feels like. Is there a part of your body, a room, an area where your parents stay? Your parents of origin, your parents of choice? Where would they occupy if they came in to your house, your body house? What does that area feel like? Is there an area of your body slash house that if you could, you would ask someone who's handy to come in and help you fix or change or alter in any way? Now, if you'd like to, you can allow the images to fade. And go to where your breath rests naturally, where you're comfortable, where there's some ease. And rest your heart there. A little sanctuary somewhere inside for yourself. A little pocket, a corner, a room, a space, an area. And just rest your kind attention in that area of your body quietly. No expectation. Nothing to do, but just to notice sensations, breath, whatever it is that you can sense in that area of your body for the next short while. Just stay in one place if you can. Now let yourself take a couple of deeper breaths. Very slow, gentle, sweet breaths, 2 or 3 times. And then when you're ready, allow your eyes to slowly and gently lift open. And as your eyes are opened or opening, see if you can still maintain some sense of what's going on inside. Maybe with your eyes opened, you can feel your breath, for instance. Very important. Maybe with your eyes opened, you can really sense your hands and what they're doing at this moment without looking at them. Maybe you sense something internal like your belly or your heartbeat. Or maybe even something like noticing the weight on your sit bones, if you're leaning a little bit more to the right or to the left. If you're standing, you might notice that on your feet. So these are all little touchstones that we can include in our conscious awareness, no matter what we're doing. As we're having conversation, as we're listening, as we're walking outside, as we're not as easy when we're working, but possible. And it's interesting to get to know what's going on internally, because of what I've been saying is that the body is reflecting the thoughts and emotions that we're having before we actually know that we're having them. And so the signals are being given, and we're generally occupied externally, not so internally and externally, but just more externally. And we don't notice something until it starts to get really loud. So in terms of recognizing our perceptions, the body is incredibly interesting, I think. In noticing even in the second foundation of mindfulness, feeling tone, in noticing how things are coming into contact with our consciousness, our awareness, our conscious awareness, we can start to notice if there's the flavor of pleasant, of unpleasant, of neutral. Now I say flavor because it's not necessarily that we might say to ourselves, oh, that's a pleasant thought. Oh, that's an unpleasant sight. For instance, we're not necessarily going around our lives labeling or naming as such, but we can start to sense pleasant, unpleasant, more maybe than neutral, but pleasant and unpleasant as things come into contact through the 6 sense doors. That's through the body, right? So the ears, hearing, seeing, smelling, tasting, touching, which is sensation, and thinking. Everything that comes into contact with our conscious awareness is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And generally that happens so quickly and it's not noticed that we're not aware of how that is the bridge to our perceptions of the way we see things. And the way we see things are what gets us into trouble. our perceptions are what creates suffering. Not the way things are, but how we perceive them to be. So if we retrack there, retrace those steps, the more and more sensitive we become to our bodies, maybe some of you felt it there, or kind of got a little bit of a sense of a shape. The more we sense the body in one way or another, the more we start to sense when it shifts and changes. And we start to be able to interpret those shifts and changes, whether it be change and shift in breath, change and shift in musculature, change and shift in bone structure, which happens, change and shift internally in terms of like tightening the belly, or the lungs feeling a little rigid or tight, for instance. We start to sense these changes and shifts as they're occurring. And we start to know, oh, that's my flag for unpleasant. Or, that's the signal of pleasant. Now, in and of itself, neither are problematic, right? But generally, they're springboards. Pleasant and unpleasant is a springboard to lots of thoughts and feelings. So pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, the feeling tones are what give rise to thoughts and feelings about something. And it might start about one thing, something might start about one thing, and as we know, it proliferates and you can't even know what started what anymore. How'd that start? What began that process, that thinking process? How did I end up here? I think we're all fairly familiar with that territory. So perception, again, is what leads to suffering. And a lot of times we can understand perception in a number of different ways, and we can retrace our steps. Obviously, part of mindfulness is remembering. One of the beautiful aspects of mindfulness is to remember. If we're really mindful, we remember. And when we remember, we can retrace our steps, but we can also sense those steps somatically, energetically, even as they're starting to shift and change. And that's when we have real choice. Afterwards, we go, yeah, sure, we can make choice. But if we want to either prevent a habit or pattern or conditioning from continuing, because we know we have lots of those, or from starting one, we need to be aware of its path or the paths. So something isn't conditioned overnight, as we know. It takes some time, it takes repetition. And we're starting new variety of a theme of habits all the time. That's human nature and behavior. But rather than thinking about our conditioning, our habits, our patterns of behavior, which is important, it's absolutely very important to be able to break things down, to know the story of things, absolutely. But it's equally as important and sometimes maybe more valuable if you've become quite familiar with your own behavioral patterns and stories, to become familiar with them in the felt sense, in the somatic expression of perceptions, thoughts, feelings, etc. I hope that makes some sense. Once we are aware of how things are shifting and changing, whether it be shape or breath or both, or maybe you had, an interesting experience, could have been pleasant, could have been unpleasant, but interesting nonetheless, of your body as a house. There are areas of our bodies that we don't go to. We don't inhabit them very well. We don't inhabit the whole body very well, generally speaking, unless we've put some effort into that, unless we've tried, unless we've really looked, felt, spent that time. And as long as part of the body is not so conscious and not so lived in, that's where everything's going to get stashed and stored, or that is where everything is stashed and stored. It can be like that too. So sometimes it's like the body has, there's a room in your body that has a little trunk in it, and you've put all those poison pen letters in there that you don't want to throw out, but you don't want to read. Or all the stuff that you can't let go of from your childhood that could stay in one area of your body. So we know from lots of different more contemporary studies on trauma that the body stores thoughts and feelings, right? Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that we all have trauma. We do in one way or another, big T, little t, let's say, but we can certainly begin to notice and know and unearth, so to speak, where we've stashed and stored things and where we might start now to stash and store things. So it could be as simple as the shoulders. It could be the chest. It could be the belly. Those are, some pretty, it could be the throat. Those are pretty common areas that we will tighten up, push away things from, push things away from, or hold on to. And all of those are describing clinging, right? Clinging, as we know from Dharma, is what causes our suffering. So we can start to feel, to sense and feel suffering, clinging, attachment, aversion in terms of the body without having to think about it, without having to figure it out. We can just know. And what can be quite interesting is not only do we start to sense and know that, we can actually rearrange it. We have choice. We have lots of choice. Part of the benefits and beauty of breath practice, of anapanasati, is concentration, part of it. Yeah, we can become so serenely concentrated that we open up into incredible spacious awareness. So concentration can lead to spacious awareness. Concentration also can lead to the ability to see things as they're arising rather than after they've already arisen. And all of that is done primarily, not always, not totally, but primarily through breath, right? So breath is a vehicle that can change the landscape of the body. Breath is a vehicle that reflects the landscape of the mind, heart, and body. And breath can be a vehicle to change that which we are sensing is not helpful and possibly even harmful. So I'd like to invite you just to notice how you're feeling now. And when I say feeling, I don't necessarily mean emotional, but just the overall tonality of your mind, body, and heart in general. It can be very helpful to check in with ourselves from time to time, actually frequently, and just notice how the mind is, how the body is, how the heart is, just how we are. The more that we check in and we're aware of ourselves throughout our waking hours, the more we get to know sort of general states, and when general states change and become maybe more acute or more dull or just rearranged in one way or another, which they will. So the more we check in and the more we really sense our bodies, the more we get to know it. And the more we get to know our bodies, the more we can live in them fully, just be embodied. And there's so much benefit to being embodied. One of the benefits of being embodied is that we're present. It doesn't stop there, but that's a huge benefit. The body is always in the present moment. It's not in the past or the future. So the moment we sense our breath, the moment we feel a sensation or sensations, we're right here, right now, nowhere else. Nowhere else. So that's hugely beneficial, as we know. So it can be grounding as well to be embodied, because we can actually feel our feet or legs or whatever is closest to the earth. And so that can create some contact, some connection with the earth. We can be earthbound. Remember the Buddha's earth touching gesture, used the earth as his witness, as Mara was shooting all that she had at him to try to take him out of his meditation state under the Bodhi tree. So the earth is also our witness. It's our home. It's where we live and where we can find presence as well. Be present and find presence. And then we also know from one moment to the other what we're about to think and feel. So this is developed, this is cultivated over time. It's not instantaneous, but the ways in which we start being able to sense what's going on before it's cognized, which is what the body's always doing, giving us some sort of signal here or there, is to just start to pay attention to it more. So there's been a lot of research about mindfulness, as we all know. And then there's newer research about what's called introception. And we in contemplative circles call it inner awareness, same thing. Introception in that we are aware of what's going on internally, as well as being out in the world or aware of what's going on externally. And some of the research studies have shown that sustained introception, so sustained inner awareness of inside, in the subtle body, the somatic body, however, the energetic body, just inside, inner awareness, coupled with mindfulness, is the most potent tool we have for self-regulation, for emotional intelligence, to shift and change behavioral patterns, to even make a pretty good dent. Now I'm saying this, I didn't read this in the research, but a good dent in pain, in physical pain, definitely in emotional pain and mental pain, definitely. Because what lives in the body comes from contact, right? That's the mind, that's the heart, that's perception. So there's so much benefit in not only just being embodied, but really being able to interpret the language of the body and to sense it as it's talking to us. So there's a Tibetan Rinpoche named Khenpo Kartar Rinpoche, and he said that the way we experience things is simply the display of our minds. The display. Everybody's display is slightly different. That's because we have our own ideas, our own thoughts, our own perceptions, our own opinions, our own judgments, our own flavoring, coloring, beliefs, faiths, etc. Yeah. So part of our practice is to be able to uncover the way things are, not what we think they are, not how we feel they are, not what we hope they are, not what we wish they were, but how things are in and of themselves. Seeing things arise and shift and change and pass away as they are. So the display is another descriptive word, I think, for perception, opinion, ideas, hopes, and feelings. Yeah. And that's why everybody's slightly different. But display, I think, is a nice word in a sense because it can be really interesting to watch. You know, the more curious we are about our own awareness, our own patterns, our own being, the less personal we're taking things. And the more we can start to see how things are made of mechanics, really. I mean, that's part of what the Buddha described in dependent origination. This happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. They're mechanics. There's process to what we know to be ourselves. There's process that is in common, that all of us have in common in the way we think and feel, processes. So we can look at the processes, not what is being processed, but the process itself. Bhikkhu Analayo writes extensively about that in the Satipatthana Sutta, his book on the Satipatthana Sutta. He says that we can see the how of experience, not the what. The how of experience, not the what. And so part of traversing the body and understanding its language and sensing is seeing how things start to arise before we have to understand what it is. We get too involved sometimes in the what. That's the personalization, that's the identification of something. Now, we all do that, and I'm not saying that with a judgmental stance. I'm saying that it's interesting. I find that really interesting, because if we can take the how of experience rather than, oh, it's mine and it's about me, or it's about you, or it's about them, or it's about whatever, just see how things are arising in awareness. It's like, wow, I never noticed that before. And it's more easy to come into the process rather than just feel badly about it later. So in other words, it's easier to cut through the process when we see we can, rather than wait and lament because it's causing suffering. So let me say that another way, because I don't feel like that came out too clearly. If we're noticing, for instance, something like pleasant or unpleasant in terms of the body, like a pulling back or a tightening or constriction or a changing of breath, which we can start to notice, then we can interrupt the process of that becoming extensive thoughts and feelings about something. Because let's say you start to feel your body constrict somewhere. You've become aware of it to that extent, and we can be. This is totally doable. This is part of what we can cultivate. You become aware of a narrowing, a constricting, a tightening, a pulling away. You can breathe into it. You can put your hand there. You can use your imagination and guide some breeze into it, or color, or you can just invite some softness. You can do that on the spot more and more, not so that there's no reactions to things at all, but so that we can make better choices, make more conscious choices about how things are going to go, because we all know how we end up. And we start to see the patterns of how we end up. And, you know, they're usually, oh, I'm here again. Same old, same old. And what we want to see that, because we want to see how much pain is caused in some of the places that we end up. And then we want to be able to retrace our steps and see how we got there, cognitively, but also somatically. So that's the coupling that I'm trying to emphasize here, is that we want to be cognitive about our patterns, our conditioning. Yes, absolutely. We want to know the story. We want to know the origins. Yeah. But we also want to be able to catch things before they formulate it into thoughts, before that's formulated into feelings, before we get caught and spun and identified. So hopefully that is inspiring, because we can. There's a wonderful Japanese Roshi named Uchiyama Roshi. And he talks about the brain's conceptual hand. He wrote a book on it. And so I find this to be really revealing and very helpful. He says that thinking means to be grasping or holding onto something with our brain's conceptual hand, in quotes. But if we open it, if we don't conceive, what is in our hand falls away. And our true self also includes that which lets go. So if you can imagine the brain is gripping something, you probably can sense that when it happens. Eyebrows get tight, maybe you get a headache, jaws tense. There's lots of different ways that we can exhibit those kinds of things. But, you just feel like, tight, bothered. That's the brain's conceptual hand going, gripping, grabbing, contracting, the fist getting really tight and hard. No, that's not comfortable. So what he's suggesting, and what we can do, is release. Release the clinging. Release the clinging in the brain's conceptual hand is the body. And again, this might take a little time to be able to do this on the spot, but it's attainable. It's definitely attainable. None of us start out knowing how to be in our bodies that well, at least in this culture, but we can learn. It's cultivated, it's developed with some interest and curiosity, and then sustained attention. So our practice of mindfulness, for instance, is incredibly beneficial because it cultivates our ability to sustain awareness on something, to connect with something and stay there with some time so that we actually can get to know it, so that there's a relationship with something, so that we become one with something. It's a different way of saying it. So what I'd like to do is guide you through a practice that you might find helpful. So this is probably a lot of concept. Excuse me. And you might be asking, because I've had this question asked quite a bit. So what do I do about what I'm sensing in terms of clinging, attachment, aversion, the mind's conceptual hand, the pleasant or the unpleasant? So all of those are expressions of the same thing. What do I do about that? Well, you don't have to necessarily do anything after a while. You just have to be aware, because that awareness, shining the light of kind awareness on something, changes it. But there are also what we can call skillful means. There are tools, there are bridges towards more and more liberation, towards letting go, that I think are really, really helpful. And so one of these techniques is to use breath as a way to relax, release, soften, find a little bit more space, air out your rooms, so to speak, that you might find helpful from time to time. And so what I would suggest, and I'll guide you through this, is for about 10 minutes, is that you do this on your own and you find specific areas of your body that you don't really sense that much. and spend a little time in there like with this technique or something similar. Okay. So let's, I suggest that you close your eyes for this because it's going to involve a little bit of visualization. And get as comfortable as your body is able to be for now. And I'd like you to imagine, because we're going to call on our ally of Earth, I'd like you to imagine your most favorite place outside, whether it be by a stream or by the ocean, in the mountains, the desert, the woods, a garden or a field, someplace that you've been, or you can imagine being even, that gives you solace and peace, maybe even joy and delight. And as you picture this environment, see if you can picture yourself in that environment. Can you notice the air? Maybe it has a particular scent, the scent of seawater, the scent of green leaves, crisp mountain air. Imagine that you can breathe this air in, that you can allow the breeze or the wind of this environment to enter into your body anywhere you choose. And you bring in the healing properties, the gift of nature, of outer nature, bring it to inner nature, of which we are. Bring this air, this breeze, this wind inside to a particular place in your body that maybe you'd like to air out or refresh or loosen or heal. Maybe a place where you cultivate a little bit more space. An area that's tight. Breathe that breeze, that breath, that wind, that air into a particular place in your body, big or small, and hold it for a moment and know that as you're holding, just a very brief pause, that air, that breeze, that wind, and all its attributes are being absorbed. And then breathe out and let that breeze, that air, that wind carry out anything that's not needed anymore. Just like a fresh spring breeze blowing through a room and airing it out, refreshing it. Utilize the gifts of nature and bring them in. Very lightly as a bubble, hold the breath, the breeze, the wind for a moment, and then let it go. Use your very gentle pausing and retaining time as the time to absorb all the qualities of this environment, just like you're there. You can elongate your breath if you're feeling that might be helpful. You can keep the breath just as it is. Whatever works for you is great. But very gentle, very soft, very purposeful connection to nature and utilizing all the benefits of nature inside of you for transformation, for change, for softening, for space, for renewal. Very gently allow the images that you're utilizing to fade. Let your breath just be as it wants to be, wherever it wants to be. It might get a little bit more quiet, a little smaller. And see what happens when you let go of the image and the direction and step away and let your breath just be as it wants to be naturally. And a breath that is a constant exchange between ourselves and nature, between ourselves and each other, between all life, giving and receiving. And then slowly, slowly allow your eyes to open again. And I'd like to thank you for joining me and to tell you that a couple of things. One is I hope there was some spark of inspiration from what we've done, and that you will continue to investigate the subtle body as you can and when you can. There's a recording of what I just guided you into, Breath of Nature, I call it, on my website, which I think is on San Diego Insight page. It's jillsatterfield.org. There are other recordings, audio recordings up there. And you can get in contact with me that way also. And this is the kind of thing that I like to teach a lot. And so I'll continue on with it and do series and longer workshops and trainings. If you'd like to join me, just sign up for my newsletter, which is infrequent and periodic these days. So you won't be bombarded, I promise. But I'd love to also to hear from you if you have questions or have had an experience from what we've done. Please reach out. So I don't want to, I don't like existing in a vacuum on one side of the computer and not knowing how anything has landed or been absorbed or not from you. It's important to me that I hear from you if you feel called to let me know. The other thing is that there's misspelling of my name. It's only one F in Satterfield, but there's the PayPal, the donation page is on my website, and it's now on San Diego Insight website too. And I am very grateful for anything that you can offer for our time together. Very, very grateful. We do this because we love it, and it's transformed us. And to be a teacher is to be an endless student. And I feel incredibly grateful that I can be an endless student along with you. And to get some support for that is really beautiful. So I'm very appreciative of anything that you might be able to give. And I want to thank San Diego Insight. I want to thank you, Irene, for coming to the series at Spirit Rock and then inviting me to be with your community tonight. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And please stay as well as possible. Still a little treacherous out, in virus land. And stay well so that we can continue on this path.